In this video, we will look at value returning methods in C#. So let's look at some examples of value returning methods that we've already used. So first comes, we will look at the console.readline method. And if I look at the header for the console.readline method, I see that the console.readline method returns a string value. So when I call the console.readline method, if I want to save the returned value, I need to have a variable of the correct type on the left-hand side, use the assignment operator, and in this way we can take the value that is returned from the method and use it in the calling method. Let's look at another example. We've used the int.parse method. The int.parse method takes a string value as an input value, and it returns an int data type. So if I want to save the value that is returned from the int.parse method, I need an int variable declared and ready to go. I use the assignment operator to assign the value that is returned from the method into the variable of the calling method. So to look at this again, whenever you want to call a static value returning method, you just type the name of the method. If the method has input parameters, you supply the values. But if you want to save the value that is returned from a value returning method, you have to have a variable ready to take that value. And so we use a variable and the assignment operator on the left-hand side of the method call in order to save the returned value in the calling method. So let's do a quick couple examples in Visual Studio to see how this works. Alright, for the first method I'm going to create a method that returns a string with quotes around it. So in this method I want to be able to, we're going to pass in a string value, and then we will return a string value with quotes around it. So this method is not printing anything to the console, it's taking a string value and doing some work and returning a different string value. So when we declare this method, we're going to use the static access modifier. Static means we will call this method just by typing its name. But this time we are going to define a new type, a type that is returned from the method. We are returning a string value, so the type that we are returning is string. And then we will give this a name. How about we will call this quote string? Or why don't I call this add quotes? And now this method is going to require a string value to be passed into it in order for us to take that value and add quotes around it. So I'm going to create an input parameter named string. I'll just call it input here. So a string value comes in, a string value needs to come out. Now we need to implement the body of the string method, or the add quotes method, so that it does what we want it to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a string, and I'm going to call this string output. And I'm going to set this string output equal to a escaped double quote character. And then I'm going to use the plus operator to concatenate two strings together. So concatenation in C# is when you add strings, you stick them together. So I'm going to add a escaped quote character, special quote character, double quote character in front of the string, and add an escaped character at the end of the string. And then I'm going to return that output value. So here what I'm doing. Now, when you create a value returning method, when you say this method is going to return some data type besides void, then you must have a return statement at the end of your method, or somewhere in your method. Okay? You can also return early. But we need a return statement. And the value that comes after the return statement, or the return keyword, is the value that is returned. Okay, let's see this in action here. I'm going to call the add quotes method, and I'm going to create a string called important. And even though I have double quotes around the string itself is just the characters inside the double quotes. So if I were to print this string, it would just print important without the double quotes. But my add quotes method is going to take this input string and stick a double quote special character on the front and the back of it. Now if I want to save that return value, that modified string, back in main, I need a string variable on the left hand side to hold the result. So I'm just going to call this string s is equal to add quotes important. S should have the string value important with the double quotes around it. So let's print that result. Console.writeLine. I will print s. And let's see what it looks like. So we printed the string important, but we also printed the double quotes around it. All right. Let's do another example. Here we're going to create a method that takes a double Celsius value as input, and it's going to return the temperature in Fahrenheit. So we're doing a Celsius to Fahrenheit converter, and here I have the formula here that Fahrenheit is equal to the Celsius value times 9 divided by 5 plus 32. So let's see if we can implement this. This method is not printing the temperature in Fahrenheit, it's returning the temperature in Fahrenheit back to whoever calls this method. So when we define this method, it's going to be a static method. It's returning the temperature in Fahrenheit after this formula is executed. And so if I pass a double value in, I'm going to produce a double value out. So my return type is going to be double. Now I will give this a method name. I'll call this Celsius to Fahrenheit. And now I need an input parameter that will hold the Celsius value coming in. So I'll call this double C. So Celsius comes in, some Fahrenheit value comes out. Well, now it's time to implement the body of the method to do the work here. So I'm going to make a double variable called f, and this is going to hold the Fahrenheit value. Now I'm going to do my equation. I'm going to say f is equal to c times 9 divided by 5 plus 32. And I'm using the value c that is defined as an input parameter. In order for another method to use the Celsius to Fahrenheit method, that other method has to provide a double value into the method in order for it to work. So whatever value they pass in, I will use in the equation, calculate f. And now the last thing we need to do is return f. So Celsius comes in, or Fahrenheit value comes out. So let's see this in action here. I'm going to call my Celsius to Fahrenheit method, pass in some value for C, how about 21.1, and this method is going to return the double value out. So if main wants to use that Fahrenheit return value, I need to create a variable on the left hand side and assign the returned value into it. Because Celsius to Fahrenheit method returns a double, I've created a double variable to hold the result. So now we can print the result. I'll say console.writeLine 27.1c is equal to this value f, and we'll print our f value. See it in action here. So 27.1c is equal to 80.78 f. So that we passed in a starting value, the method returned a result. But then it was main's duty, the main method's duty, to use that result and do something with it. All right, let's see our next example. Create a method that takes a string of prompt text as input. This method will read the user's input and return the user's input value. So this method is going to take the place of the write read prompt for strings. Let's see this in action. I'm going to create this method to be static. It's returning the user's input. The user's input is always going to be a string value. So I'm returning a string data type. I'm going to call this method string prompt. And the method header or the method description says it needs to take a string of text as input. It's going to use that input as a prompt text. So I'm going to create a string input parameter called prompt, and we should be good. So string value in is going to be what we print to the user. The string value that is returned is the value that the user has entered. So let's implement this. First, I'm going to print the user's prompt text, console.write prompt. Now I don't know what I'm printing here, but I'm going to print whatever the other method sends me as an input value. Next, I'm going to create a string variable to hold the user input, and I will call the console.readline method to read that in. So when we call this method, we will first print whatever text was passed to us, then we will wait for the user to enter a response, save the user's response into a variable, and then we will return that value back to whoever called us. So we're still doing the write and the read line for our prompt, but we've put that work inside a method. So now if the user comes up here and wants a string value, maybe we could say string input is equal to string prompt, enter a value. Maybe we will say enter any value. We'll make it nice and generic. And whatever value is entered in, we will store it in main's input variable. All right, let's go ahead and print it out. I'm going to say console.writeLine. Here I'm going to print add quotes, and then I will pass my input value in. So for our last example here, I will show us calling two methods on one line. Now when we call our call the add quotes method is expecting a string value to be passed into it, and input is a string variable. It will hold a string value. So the string prompt is going to pass in the user input value into our input variable. We will pass that value into the add quotes method. The add quotes method is going to return a string that has quotes around it. Then that string value is passed into the writeLine method, which should then display it to the console. So we'll see that in action here. Compare our output to the code. So we printed important with strings, calculated Celsius to Fahrenheit. Now our string prompt is writing, so the enter any value string was passed to this prompt variable, and then I'm just printing that string to the console. Alright, we'll enter any value. We'll call this great code. And then on the next line, we added quotes around that string and printed the resulting string value. Hope that makes a little bit of sense.